It's currently 9:27, Thursday the 9th of January, 2025. My last recording went over the avenues of EMF influence. In this recording, I would like to go over the potential weaponization for EMF, but also auditory tools, symbols, specific music, and iconography itself. This is delving into the realms of semiotic and thought injection, something I became aware of after reading a very interesting employee of Lockheed Martin's work named John Norcine. What he has to talk about is heavily involved in the types of experiences that targeted individuals suffer with on a day-to-day basis. John Norcine coined the term biofusion, which is something I will get into on a later recording. For now, we're looking at specifically thought injection. Thought injection can be explained like this. We're outside and I yell at you, there's a wasp behind you. You turn your head to the side to be met with perhaps a darting shadow of the wasp, followed by some buzzing. This is enough information for your amygdala to be triggered and recall the specific pattern, thought of the wasp, in which the brain is momentarily overwhelmed with learned fear, as we're to recognize the potential danger of the wasp stinging us through experience. The body is then conditioned to start running. So the wasp analogy, Norcine is using an example of the wasp sting to illustrate how certain stimuli can elicit strong reactions, where the amygdala, often responsible for fear, disgust, and negativity bias responses, it is a key part of the brain responsible for processing emotions like fear. So when the amygdala is activated by the wasp signal, it can momentarily overwhelm someone, in where deeply embedded semiotic structures are proven to trigger biological and emotional responses. And in this analogy, we see someone starting to run away. Now, emotional triggers are a very potent way of making someone recall specific memories, like the smell of cut grass might take you back to your childhood, or the smell of certain foods. And this is the thing with psychotronics or sound. They can convey an emotional response or mimic the very sensation that a certain stimulus is in your environment. John Norcine talks about methods to tune oneself to another person's frequency, finding the right resonance to make sense of the symbols that they use. So scrying for the wasp signal to input that fear response, and then making someone act out on a pre-programmed reaction, which could be conditioned remotely. The brain will store behaviors or responses to a certain symbol, and when they are encountered again, they trigger a cascade of physiological reactions. Those reactions and those patterns can be conditioned. They can be programmed into someone intentionally, and this is an art called radionics. It's something that's used by musicians and artists, very similar to Manly P. Hall's Seething Energies of Lucifer. The idea to put a word out there and get a specific reaction, though specifically with this we're using a symbol, where then you can condition someone to have a specific reaction to that, granting you the ability to trigger that reaction, that thought pattern, once again upon the presence of the programmed stimulus. Emotional conditioning, potential threat or reward, or Pavlovian training can all be utilized to train the brain to respond to stimulus in a certain way. All just through repetition, we can learn to condition certain thought patterns and cycles to remote influence thought, and now make people think or act out in different ways, or change how they see reality over time. John Norcine has discussed the avenues on how the Columbine shooters may have potentially been engineered by using some of his techniques through Russian research on alcohol was then utilized in the development of antipsychotics, specifically activating circuitry in the mind, now to condition the amygdala with repetitive stimulus to act out certain thought patterns, where the shooters were given access to gaming websites purposefully embedded with subliminals, and where the electrical grid was then pulsed to change the flicker rate on their monitors, creating specific subliminals to be reinserted into the mind to affect the amygdala and the patterns of thought that followed. Now, with their antipsychotics, specific suggestions and discussions could be placed into their brain. The ability to weaponize thought injection becomes a very complex system, utilizing every organ and every part of the brain individually, using some form of guerrilla warfare, often even numbing certain senses or creating brain damage or damage in the body to utilize certain circuitry. Think how a blind person will make up for the lack of brain activity with heightened hearing. They utilize specific circuitry for more potent thought injection, and then also the ability to guess what someone's thinking, as they've finally started to tune into specific semiotics, specific patterns or symbology, like the image of a stinger. They can merge these thoughts together while also using certain circuits of thought, be it anger, lust, or suicide. They can start to see how those thoughts play out in a person, sensing them with vague electromagnetic sensors in a controlled environment, or long distance using things like Doppler radar and other forms of very low resolution electromagnetic sensing, looking at the posture of someone, their respiration, heart rate, sweating, salivation, and anticipation with moving. An AI can learn to mind read this person all through external factors alone. And this is why targeted individuals go through such a torturous procedure for its guerrilla warfare into the body and the mind. When John Norcine was asked about the ethics of such research, he stated, "The full impact of the brain research on future military and civilian activities is not well understood in the current national security domain. Right now, there's no enforceable bioethics authority to prevent physiological uses that emanate from cyberspace. Consider this. Right now, the hyperspectral region below 100 Hz is wide open, the wild, wild west. And all brains on this planet operate in this very important twilight zone. By implication, therefore, anyone harmed by technology impacting them in this area below 100 Hz, where the body conducts all its electrical activity, has no legal or financial recourse from the individual agency, corporation responsible." John Norcine was exposed to methods developed by Russians that utilized a form of mathematics called Krylov space, which would take persons' attributes and calculate a soul index, looking at how the brain is storing specific semantic data, and then creating means to move around the soul index around a multidimensional conformal board, wherein free will would either be minimalized or maximized using a technique called reflexive control. And at certain black hole-like locations on the board, the soul would just drop in and undergo a complete role reversal. He states it's easy to get souls to drop offline, but not easy to reverse the process and bring them out undamaged. John Norcine's methods he developed for Lockheed Martin are very much the same, looking at how he can remote influence someone, where someone will act out as if it's their own input, unknowing that someone else is pushing the controls, seeking to enhance cognitive abilities, change them, or completely disable them, enhancing, changing, or creating new thought.